It started with something so small, I almost laughed it off. A simple letter slipped under our front door, sealed in a white envelope with the HOS logo stamped across the corner like some official government notice. I remembered that night clearly. My wife and I had just finished dinner, the kind of easy Tuesday night where nothing feels urgent. She was rinsing dishes in the sink while I carried our plates over, humming to myself. That's when I spotted the envelope near the door. At first, I thought it was a flyer, maybe a coupon for lawn services or pest control. But when I opened it, the tone was anything but friendly. Violation notice. Non-compliant porch decoration. Fine, $50. I actually chuckled. I mean, $50? For what? A flower pot? My wife came over, drying her hands with a towel, and glanced at the paper. She frowned, then shook her head. That's ridiculous. I'm not wasting energy on this. She crumpled it up, tossed it aside, and went back to loading the dishwasher. To her, it was background noise. To me, it was a curiosity. To the hoe? Well, it was the start of a war we didn't see coming. Because what we didn't realize was that ignoring that first fine was like stepping onto a chessboard where the other side wasn't just playing for money, they were playing for control. Back when we first moved into this neighborhood, it felt like paradise. The kind of suburban dream you see in glossy real estate magazines. The streets were lined with tall oaks that cast soft, dappled shadows over the sidewalks. In the evenings, the lake at the end of our street caught the sunset in a way that made the water glow like liquid glass. Families walked hand in hand after dinner. Kids zoomed by on bikes. Dogs barked happily as they chased tennis balls across the neatly trimmed lawns. And our home was perfect. White railings on the porch, navy blue shutters, a little flower garden my wife and I planted together. On weekends, we grilled burgers, invited neighbors over, laughed late into the night with drinks on the patio. For a while, life here was everything we dreamed it would be. But underneath that picture-perfect surface was something uglier. Something that neighbors only mentioned in hushed tones, usually after glancing over their shoulders. The hoe. When we first moved in, they seemed harmless enough. They mailed out newsletters with cheerful clip art, reminding everyone to keep lawns mowed and trash bins tucked away. They branded themselves as protectors of property value. At first, it seemed almost helpful, but little cracks showed through. Like the Johnsons across the street, who whispered one night over dinner that they'd been fined $200 because their mulch wasn't the approved shade of brown. Or Mrs. Campbell, a widow who confided that the hoe had forced her to repaint her shutters 3 times in 1 year because the color guidelines mysteriously changed. It was absurd, but most people shrugged and paid up. Because when you stand up to the hoe, you usually stand alone. We didn't know it then, but soon we'd be the ones marked. The second notice came a week later. This one wasn't $50. It was $100. The offense? Still the same flower pot, same spot, same supposed violation. I remember my wife holding the letter up, her jaw tight. They're doubling it? Over a pot? That's insane. She drafted a quick email to the hoe, demanding clarification. She pointed out that at least 4 other houses on the street had identical flower pots. No reply. Days later, a third notice appeared. $200 this time. And this one carried darker wording. Failure to comply will result in further penalties, including potential lien action. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about a flower pot anymore. This was about power, about control, about breaking us down until we bent the knee like everyone else. And we weren't about to bend. The harassment escalated quickly. Every week, a new letter. The violations got pettier. A hose left coiled in the yard. Grass an inch too long. A barely visible chip in our driveway concrete. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the paper and froze. An orange sign was staked right into our front lawn, bright enough for the whole block to see. Property in violation. It felt like a scarlet letter nailed into the ground by the very people supposed to represent our community. My wife stood beside me, her arms crossed tight against her chest, eyes blazing. "This is humiliation," she whispered. And she was right. It wasn't about the rules. It was about shaming us into submission. But what the hoe didn't know was that my wife wasn't someone you could bully. She began collecting everything, every notice, every inconsistency, every photograph of neighbors with the same violations who were never fined. Our dining table became a battlefield of binders, highlighters, and legal codes. She wasn't just preparing to fight them. She was preparing to expose them. Then came the night everything boiled over. It was late, close to midnight, when a heavy knock rattled the front door. Not the polite kind of knock, the kind that made your stomach drop. I opened the door to find two police officers standing on our porch, hands resting casually near their belts. Their cruiser lights flashed red and blue against the white siding of our house. "Evening," one officer said. "We received a complaint from the hoe. Something about non-compliance and refusal to obey lawful orders." I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just fines anymore. This was intimidation, elevated to a whole new level. But my wife didn't flinch. She stepped forward, holding the latest notice in her hand. "Officers, this is a civil matter, not criminal. They have no authority to involve you." The taller officer scanned the paper, clearly uncomfortable. Then he looked up at her and froze. His eyes widened. His lips parted slightly, and in a voice that trembled with disbelief, he whispered, "Judge, it's you?" Silence crashed over the porch. My jaw dropped. My wife's expression remained calm, but her eyes flashed. The officer took a step back, visibly shaken. His partner glanced between us, confusion etched across his face. "Wait, you're—" That was the moment everything changed. The hoe had called the police on the one person in the entire county with the authority to dismantle their entire scheme. And they had no idea. The silence on our porch was so heavy, I swear I could hear the crickets stop chirping. The taller officer, his nameplate read Martinez, was staring at my wife like he'd just seen a ghost. His hand twitched at his side, not toward his weapon, but toward his cap, almost as if instinctively preparing to show respect. "Judge?" he repeated, softer this time, as though he needed to confirm it out loud just to believe it. My wife straightened her posture, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, Officer Martinez. I am Judge Eleanor Hayes, and unless the whole board has suddenly been granted criminal jurisdiction in this state, I suggest you explain why you're standing on my porch at midnight." The second officer, younger, maybe mid-20s, glanced at his partner nervously. "Wait, you mean Judge Hayes? The one from county court?" Martins cleared his throat. "Yes, the same." That single word shifted the entire atmosphere. The power dynamic flipped like a switch. A moment ago, we were supposed to be the violators, the troublemakers, the ones standing accused. But now, the truth hung in the air. The hoe had just dragged the law onto the doorstep of the very person who was the law in this county. I'll never forget the way Martinez suddenly softened his tone, his stance changing from authoritative to almost deferential. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this was reported to us as a domestic noncompliance issue. We didn't realize." His voice trailed off, as though even he knew how ridiculous it sounded. My wife held the notice up higher. "This is a fine. A civil penalty. The proper channel for enforcement is small claims court, not a police dispatch. Tell me, officer, do you often respond to calls about lawn ornaments?" The younger cop's ears burned red. "No, ma'am. This is unusual." Martinez finally exhaled, as if releasing the weight of the whole absurd situation. He turned slightly, lowering his voice so only we could hear. "Judge, with all due respect, I think you may have a bigger problem with your hoe than just fines." I didn't know it yet, but that single sentence was foreshadowing the storm about to break open. The next morning, word spread like wildfire. Somehow, despite it happening at midnight, half the neighborhood seemed to know that cops had been at our house. And in a community like ours, gossip moved faster than lightning. At first, it came in whispers. Neighbors paused on their morning walks, pretending to check their phones while sneaking glances at our porch. Mothers pushing strollers slowed down, murmuring to each other, their eyes flicking back toward us. By afternoon, the story was fully twisted. Did you hear? The Hayes family had the police called on them. Something about refusing to follow orders. Serious business. Serious business. That's exactly what the Hoe wanted people to believe. But what they didn't count on was Martinez. Because later that week, Martinez showed up at our door again. Not in uniform, not with sirens. Just in plain clothes, carrying a cup of coffee and a look that told me he hadn't been able to shake what happened that night. He asked to speak to my wife privately, but I stood close enough to overhear most of the conversation. He explained carefully that this wasn't the first time the Hoe had called in complaints against homeowners. They've pulled this stunt before, Martinez admitted, lowering his voice. They call us out for nonsense, hoping to scare people into compliance. Usually, it's nothing more than barking dogs or trash bins left out too long. But sending us after you. He shook his head. That's a different level. My wife leaned forward. And do you keep responding to them? He sighed. We have to. They phrase the calls as domestic disturbances or safety concerns. We're obligated to check them out. But off the record, he paused, meeting her eyes. It's harassment. And frankly, it's an abuse of our resources. That's when my wife's expression changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even frustration. It was something colder, something sharper. It was the look of someone who'd just been handed the evidence they needed to win. The Hoe president, her real name was Deborah, but everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen behind her back, wasn't just enforcing rules. She was orchestrating intimidation. You could see it in the way she carried herself at community meetings, chin tilted high, voice dripping with condescension. She wore oversized sunglasses even indoors, as though shielding herself from the peasants she lorded over. And always clutching a binder so thick it looked like she was preparing for a corporate merger rather than a neighborhood barbecue. When we confronted her about the police incident, she didn't even blink. It's procedure, she said smoothly, adjusting her pearls. When residents refuse to comply, we escalate to the authorities. My wife's voice was measured, but each word was a scalpel. No, Mrs. Owens. When residents refuse to comply, you file a claim in civil court. You don't weaponize the police. That's harassment. And it stops now. Karen smiled, one of those smug, tight-lipped smiles that told you she thought she was untouchable. You may think you're special because of your position, Judge Hayes. But the whole rules apply to everyone. Even you. For a moment, I swear the air in that community hall dropped 10 degrees. My wife didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gathered her papers, stood, and delivered a single line that made the room buzz. We'll see about that. From that day forward, the battle lines were drawn. On one side, the Hoe, with its stack of petty fines, its threat letters, its orange violation signs, and its smug president who thought she could bully an entire community. On the other, my wife, who just happened to be one of the youngest, sharpest judges in the county, with a reputation for dismantling corrupt schemes piece by piece. And in between, the neighbors, watching silently, waiting to see who would win. Because here's the thing about neighborhoods like ours. Everyone pretends to get along, but the truth is, most people live in quiet fear of the Hoe. Fear of the letters. Fear of the fines. Fear of losing their homes over some trumped-up lien. But when my wife stood up, something shifted. People began to whisper encouragement. A nod here. A quiet, good luck there. Even the Johnsons, who'd once been crushed under a pile of mulch fines, stopped us at the mailbox one morning. If you can take them down, Mr. Johnson muttered, glancing around nervously, you'd be doing us all a favor. The Hoe had ruled with fear for years. But fear only works until someone proves the bully can bleed. And that's exactly what my wife intended to do. The Hoe thought they had us cornered. Karen strutted through the neighborhood like she owned the streets, waving violation notices in the air, gossiping at every mailbox, spinning the story that we were dangerous rule breakers. But what she didn't realize was this. My wife wasn't just sitting at home fuming. She was building a case. For weeks, Eleanor collected everything, every fine, Every threat letter, every notice with vague language, every late-night phone call that mysteriously came from a blocked number but always coincided with HOA board meetings. She filed public records requests. She tracked correspondence. And she began connecting dots that no one else had dared to. One night, I walked into our office to find her surrounded by files. Pages spread across the desk, highlighters marking patterns. "They've been doing this for years," she whispered, almost to herself. "It's not just us. They've harassed at least 7 other families into selling. Every time someone resists, they bury them in fines, then threaten liens then. Buy the property cheap when the family cracks under pressure." My stomach dropped. "So this isn't about lawn ornaments. This is a racket." She looked up at me, eyes burning. "It's extortion, plain and simple. And I'm going to expose it." The next home meeting was standing room only. Karen stood at the front with her binder, smug as ever, calling the meeting to order. Her voice dripped with authority. First order of business: repeated noncompliance from the Hayes household. Continued refusal to remove unauthorized decor. Continued late fees. The room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors nodded along nervously. Others shifted uncomfortably. No one dared to speak out. Until my wife stood. "Point of order," she said clearly. Karen blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me? This isn't a court, Judge Hayes. You don't get to object here." Eleanor's voice was calm but powerful, every syllable cutting through the hall. "On the contrary, Mrs. Owens, when an association engages in unlawful conduct, every resident here has the right to challenge it. And I have evidence that this board has systematically abused its authority to harass and financially exploit this community." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face froze, then flushed crimson. "That's absurd. You can't just come in here making accusations." My wife reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder. She laid it on the table with a satisfying thud. Every fine, every bogus violation, every recorded call to the police, and records of 7 families forced into foreclosure under suspiciously similar circumstances. All documented, all ready for civil and, if necessary, criminal court. The room went silent. You could feel the shift, the neighbors leaning in, eyes wide, realizing this was bigger than a garden gnome or a fence color. Karen sputtered, trying to regain control. You think you can scare us with paperwork? The HOA has bylaws. The HOA has power." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low and cutting. "And the HOA has limits. And you, Mrs. Owens, have crossed them." The tension in that room was electric. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. Truly rattled. And then, as if fate wanted to seal the moment, Officer Martinez walked in. Not in uniform, this time in a suit. He quietly took a seat at the back of the room, arms folded. But everyone noticed. Karen's voice wavered. We're done here." Meeting adjourned, but no one moved. For years, neighbors had been afraid to speak up. But that night, something cracked. Whispers turned to voices. Voices turned to shouts. "This has gone too far." One man called, "She fined us for having our trash cans out 5 minutes late." Another woman yelled, "She threatened to take our house over a broken mailbox." Someone else shouted. The room erupted. Karen slammed her binder shut and stormed out, pearl necklace rattling, sunglasses sliding down her nose. But it was too late. The power she'd built on fear was collapsing right in front of her. 2 weeks later, the case hit court. And this time, the HOA wasn't standing across from some scared homeowner without resources. They were standing across from Judge Eleanor Hayes, armed with evidence, witnesses, and the truth. I won't bore you with every legal detail, but I'll tell you this. I have never seen my wife so commanding, so unshakable. Every time the HOA's lawyer tried to twist the facts, she countered with documents. Every time Karen tried to play the victim, Eleanor presented testimony from neighbors who'd suffered the same harassment. And then came the moment that sealed it. Eleanor projected a recorded phone call One where Karen herself instructed another board member to make life miserable for us until we got the message. The courtroom fell silent. Karen's face drained of color. When the verdict came, it was decisive. The judge, one of Eleanor's colleagues, ruled that the Ho had engaged in harassment, abuse of authority, and malicious misuse of law enforcement. They were ordered to pay damages to multiple families, remove Karen from her position immediately, and undergo external oversight for future governance. Karen's reign was over. The day the ruling was announced, something magical happened in our neighborhood. People stepped outside. I don't mean just physically. I mean emotionally. For the first time in years, neighbors weren't peeking nervously from behind curtains. They were standing on their lawns, smiling, talking, connecting. The Johnsons brought over cookies. The Millers invited us for coffee. Families that had once been too afraid to even wave at each other were now united in a way I'd never seen. And at the center of it all was Eleanor. Not because she was a judge, not because she had power, but because she'd shown them something they'd forgotten: they had rights. They didn't have to live in fear of a board abusing its authority. Karen? She moved out quietly within the month. Rumor has it she tried to join another Ho in a different neighborhood, but word travels fast. Her reputation followed her. The Ho itself was stripped of its teeth. With oversight, fines had to be reasonable, transparent, and legally grounded. No more known violations. No more secret liens. And life? Life finally went back to normal. I can't describe the peace of walking outside without scanning for orange violation tags, of mowing the lawn without worrying if it was a half-inch too tall, of watching kids play on driveways without fear of noise complaints. But the biggest impact wasn't on us. It was on the neighbors. Because after the case, people started standing up, not just here, but in nearby communities. News spread: Ho taken down by local judge. Other families started asking questions. Other boards started backing down. Eleanor didn't just win for us. She lit a fire. And to this day, when I look at her, I think back to that night, the night the cops came to our door, the night Officer Martinez froze in shock and said, "Judge, it's you?" That was the moment everything changed. Not just for us, but for an entire community that finally learned what happens when you stand up to a bully.